And welcome to my channel, Babbling Books. My name is Elaine, and I am very excited to talk about all of the things that I read in February. So, I had a great reading month. The month of February was not the most fantastic. The weather here in Texas has been just so crummy. We've had so much rain and sleet. It was gray and dreary and windy. They closed the school down for a little bit. One of my kids got sick. It was not the kind of weather that you really enjoy being outside. So we spent a lot of time indoors doing puzzles and watching movies and a lot of reading. So I read 12 books this month and an additional one that I ended up DNFing. And of those 12, 2 were nonfiction, and the other ones were either physical copies or books that I read on my Kindle. So to start with, we're going to talk about The Guest List by Lucy Foley. This is the book I ended up not finishing. So I don't read a ton of thrillers. For people who really enjoy thrillers, I don't read very many. I think on average, I probably read about 12 to 15 a year. But this one and the Guest List and I did not get along. I made it to about a page like 130, 140, which was almost halfway. And I realized I did not care about any of these characters. I didn't care who got murdered. I didn't care who the murderer was. I didn't care what happened to any of these people. And I mean, I don't have to like a character to read a book, but the character or characters should at least be interesting. And if they're not, then I should at least find the plot interesting. And none of those things applied with The Guest List. So I stopped reading it and moved on to something else. So after that, I read not The Guest List. I just talked about that one. After that, I read A Certain Hunger by Chelsea Summers. This was a book that I had seen mentioned on BookTube, and luckily my library had it in stock, so I went and checked it out, and I'm so glad that I did. This book was just such an interesting book to read. So you have Dorothy, she's the main character, and you find out from basically page 1 that she is writing her memoirs in prison. And Dorothy is a food critic, and she loves food, and she loves sex and nice things. And the descriptions in her memoirs that she uses, they are so just toothsome and tangible and luscious that you use all of your senses to perceive what she is writing in these descriptions. And I found that to just be just a wonderful reading experience. So of course, because this is structured like you're reading a memoir, you have to just trust that the narrator, that Dorothy, is a reliable narrator, but her perspective is the only one that you will get. So you just have to trust that what she's telling you is what is true. So that sort of adds an interesting element, at least I thought that it did, because I started to wonder, is this really accurate? Like, is this really what happened? Because this is all through her perception. But I mean, if you like true crime, thrillers, then you would probably really enjoy that aspect of the book. But it mostly reads like literary fiction, which I very much enjoyed. So I highly recommend this because it is very interesting to finally get the story of Dorothy's life and how she ended up in prison, what she did. And Dorothy seems to be dedicated to the self-reflection needed and telling it like it is. So, highly recommend this one, and that is A Certain Hunger by Chelsea Summers. And after that, I read a short story collection called The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Deesha Philyaw. So, about 4 years ago or so, I finally decided that I was going to try to read some short stories. I had always avoided them because I did not feel that a short story could have the same impact as a full-length novel. Much to my delight, that is not true. And ever since then, I have loved short stories. So when I see one recommended, I am immediately interested. And if you are interested in starting with short stories, then you might want to check out Jen Campbell's page because she reads a lot of them. And I'm pretty sure she has at least a few videos dedicated to short stories. But anyway, so The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. That's exactly what it is. It is short stories about the secret lives of church ladies. I'm going to talk about 2 specific stories. One of them is a sister writing to a sister that she's never met. And in this letter, she's telling her sister that their father has passed away, and she's giving some other information about other members of the family. Another one that I really enjoyed, on the back of the book, this character is described as a serial mistress. And you basically are reading a pamphlet that details to these men seeking her services exactly what they should expect, what she expects from them, what the rules are, and basically how the entire situation works. And it's completely lacking in any romantic element. It's like she pulls the curtain back. And you as the reader, you learn exactly what it's like to be a serial mistress. Really enjoyed that one. So out of the 9 stories in here, 6 of them were amazing. 3 of them I was sort of ambivalent about, but they were by no means bad. They just weren't my favorites. So that is The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Deesha Philyaw. Very good. Highly recommend it. And if you're new to short stories, it's a great place to start. Very accessible. Let me turn the page here in my notes. Oh, after that, I read Passing by Nella Larsen. And as you can see in the little picture here, this is soon to either be a TV show or a movie on Netflix. And this one's been talked about a lot on BookTube, but this was published in 1929. So it's an older book, and it basically is about Irene and Claire. Irene is the main character. The whole book is told in third person. Irene is a Black woman visiting Chicago, and she is super, super hot and she feels sick. So she asks the taxi driver to take her someplace to cool off. The taxi driver takes her to a whites only hotel. And you find out that Irene, she has a lighter skin tone, so she's able to pass as white. I think she herself said that most people assume that she's like Italian. So she's on top of this hotel drinking her iced tea, cooling off. And this other woman comes out, and much to Irene's surprise, she knows this woman. It is a friend from her childhood. And this woman's name is Claire. And as they start talking and getting to know each other all over again, Irene is rather surprised to learn that Claire passes for white all of the time. She's married to a white man who has no idea. Nobody in Claire's life knows. And Irene is a very uptight character. Her security, her family security is the most important thing in her life. And anything that threatens that, she's just filled with anxiety. And their meeting sets off a series of events. And Irene, though she is able to pass for white, she doesn't choose to do that. She's married to a Black man, and she's very active in the Black community. And as we get to know her, we also get to know Claire. And the whole book has this feeling of doom, of dread hanging over it. At least that's what I picked up on. It's like you know something, but it's more because Irene is so filled with anxiety that you as the reader are filled with that same anxiety as she's narrating this book. So it didn't feel like a light read by any means. It was a pretty easy read. It's not a very long book. The writing was very accessible. I thought it moved along at a relatively quick pace. There were some slow bits in the middle, but I thought it was very enjoyable. And I was incredibly surprised to find out that apparently passing, at least from what I was able to pick up on this book, was a lot more common than I would have thought. And there were a lot of things in here that I wasn't aware of. So it was an informative read. It was an eye-opening read. It gave me a lot of things to think about. And I enjoyed the experience of reading it. And that is Passing by Nella Larsen. I highly recommend anybody who likes literary fiction or is interested in reading a classic, pick that one up. It's worth it. And after that, I read the first book of the Frida Klein series by Nicci French, and that is Blue Monday. So to start with, I am so tired of the female detective cliche where she's got a chip on her shoulder, usually a drinking problem, just this idea that to be a female detective, you have to be this man-hating person. I'm so tired of that. So I have been avoiding female detective books for years now. I'm just really tired of it. This one is not like that. This one is about Frida Klein, who is a psychotherapist in London, and she finds herself involved in solving a crime. There are multiple perspectives, all in third person. You have Frida Klein, the detective, I think his last name is it Cleason or Clarson? I don't remember. And the bad guy has a perspective, though you're not really sure who he is. And there's the victim has a perspective as well, which was why I struggled so hard with this book. The crime that has been committed is a child abduction, and the very short chapters dedicated to the child's perspectives were gut-wrenching to me. Child abduction is basically my worst nightmare, and to read about this child thinking, you know, if I was just good enough, my mom would have kept me. This is all my fault. There's no descriptions of child abuse in here, but you see things from the child's perspective, and his thoughts are horrifying to me. And I think that would be in a lot of people. I don't think you have to be a parent to find that horrifying. But just be aware, trigger warning, because I did struggle with this book, and when I finished it, I did not feel light and happy. But it was well written. I enjoyed Frida Klein's character. I did enjoy the solving of the mystery, but like I said, it was a difficult read for me. But I did keep reading them, so that the topic was not a game ender for me, but it did keep me from enjoying it as much as I would have liked to. After that, I read an essay collection called What My Mother and I Don't Talk About. I really enjoyed this. There are, I want to say there's 15 essays, and easily 85-90% of them I found to be very enjoyable reads. So some of the essay writers are male, some are female. The majority of them are female, and they're all discussing their relationships with their mothers. The vulnerability in these essays is really what struck me so strongly, because they were honest and they were intimate, and they covered some topics that are not comfortable. mothers possibly picking a partner over the well-being of their children, blaming the child for an event or series of events, just different things. They're not all sad. There were some people in here who had good relationships with their parents, with their mother, and there were some who did not. Some that were not in contact anymore, some that were, but all of them, of course, are complicated because relationships are complicated. And I think that sometimes our relationships with our mothers are very complicated. But these essays are very accessible. They are not difficult reads. They're almost sort of like reading a weekly column in a newspaper. But I really enjoyed these. I always gravitate towards books that focus on the familial relationships between women. So that's probably one of the main reasons that I liked this so much. But it was a great read. I'm glad I read it. And I have another book like this that I'm hoping to get to later on in March. So after that, I read the second book in the Free Decline series by Nicci French. This one did not deal with child abduction, so I found it to be a much more enjoyable read. I enjoyed getting to know Frida better, getting to know the detective better. And I thought the ending was very good. I liked a few of the little surprises in this book. You know, all the things that make a mystery worth reading were here. So if you haven't read Nicci French, she has some standalones and this Free Decline series. I haven't read anything but the Free Decline series, but they're very, very good and they're worth looking into. And then after that, I listened to The Cherry Cheesecake Murder by Joanne Fluke. And it's book 8 in the Hannah Swenson series. So I'm pretty sure everybody has at least come across these or would be able to recognize the covers. But these focus on Hannah Swenson. She is a baker in a small town in Minnesota, and she always finds herself involved in some sort of mystery. And I find these to be very enjoyable to listen to on audio while I'm laying in bed, relaxing, trying to get ready to go to sleep, because they're very wholesome feeling. Now, I will say, this one here, the Cherry Cheesecake one, I didn't enjoy this one at all. A movie production company has come into their small town, so a bunch of the shops have closed. All the characters are, all the main characters that are always in the books are now like involved in this movie production. I didn't like that at all. I wanted my little small town back. But that was just this book. The rest of them are pretty good. But like I said, they're very wholesome. These are the kind of books that I could have given my grandmother to read, and she would not have looked at me with her eyebrows raised after she finished it. Like, you read this? So yeah, that is the Hannah Swenson series by Joanne Fluke, Cozy Mysteries. After that, I finally finished Power, Faith, and Fantasy by Michael Oren. This is a huge chunker of a book. It took me 2 months to finish. And it's basically the history of America's involvement in the Middle East from 1776 to the present. Now, it says present on here, but this book was published in, I'm going to say 06 or 07. So present, of course, would be much less present than I would have liked for it to have been. The majority of this book covers pre-World War I, which was also a little bit disappointing to me because I was really interested in 1900 onward, and that is covered in here, but it's not covered as much. So that is an area I'm going to have to fill in with some other books. So my biggest issue with this is there was a very America is here to help you, let us help you, altruistic feeling to the book. And that made me sort of doubt how well-rounded this book is. It didn't seem like that would be correct. I'm going to do some further reading and see if that holds weight. It was an issue that I saw frequently when I was going on Goodreads and reading the reviews of this after I finished it. That was a problem a lot of people had. But it did answer a lot of the questions that I had about America and the Middle East. So yeah, so I mean, I would still suggest it to somebody because it does have a lot of really well cited history in here. And just to show you, all of this part of the book here, can you see that? Yeah, is the citations. I mean, so it is a very well cited book. The author seemed to be very well informed. The writing was accessible. I did not feel like I was reading this great big huge history book for class. It wasn't dry. It was just informative. But, you know, what else can you say about a history book? And then after that, I read The Mist by Stephen King. So I saw this movie, must have been 15 years ago, and it horrified me. And I don't read a lot of horror. Being scared is not really something that I enjoy. But I seem to really get along with Stephen King's shorter books and his short stories. So since I still remember the movie, it's, you know, it really has stuck with me all of these years. I decided it was finally time to read this, and I'm glad that I did. It's not a long book. Like I said, it's pretty short. The pacing is, I wouldn't say it's fast, but it's not really slow. It's sort of like a medium pacing. But if you're not familiar with the story, a family, a husband and wife and a son, are living in a small town in Maine. And one morning, afternoon, this big wall of mist rolls into their town. And the son, who I want to say is about 6 or 7, and the father end up inside of like a supermarket in this little small town when this wall of mist envelops everything. And there's something in the mist. So there's a very edgy feeling where you're constantly sitting on the, you know, the edge of your seat, just waiting like for something to happen. That's sustained very well through the whole book. And then things start to happen. And, you know, of course, the father is terrified for his son's life. The son is freaking out because he's a child and he wants his mom. And there's just, you know, these horrible things are happening. There are some interesting characters inside the supermarket, so that added another element to the story. But overall, I really did enjoy this. This is probably going to end up being one of my top Stephen King books because he and I do not always get along. I think a lot of the time his books are too long and there's too much description and sometimes the endings are weak. But I'm working on having a better relationship with Stephen King's books. So, and then after that, I read the 9th book in the Hannah Swenson Cozy Murder mystery series. And this one was called The Key Lime Pie Murder. I listened to this on audio. I enjoyed this one much more than the previous one. However, I have recently noticed a few things in these books that have sort of given me pause. As I said before, there's a very wholesome feeling, very small town vibe to these books, but they are not aging well. So one of the characters, there's 3 sisters, and the younger sister is usually like away at college, but she's back in town for a little bit. And she's wearing like this really tight tank top, and her older sisters are like, "What are you wearing?" And she was like, "Oh, I think it shrunk in the dryer." She's like, "Don't worry, I'm going to change. You know, Lonnie doesn't want other guys to see me like this anyway." And she goes to change, and I'm waiting for one of her sisters to be like, you know, "You should change if you're uncomfortable, or if you don't like the way you look. You shouldn't change because this guy who you're not married to, who you don't live with," not that that really makes that big of a difference, but because he said so. Like, I kept waiting for that, but instead they turned to each other and they were like, "Oh, he's having a really good impact on her." So, like I said, they're not necessarily aging well. If a woman wants to dress she wants to dress modestly of her own choosing because that's what she's comfortable with, then by all means. But if she is comfortable in that tank top, You know, her sister should have turned to her and told her, honey, it's hot. It's really hot. We're going to be at the lake. If you're comfortable, keep it on and Lonnie can deal with it. But that's not what they did. And I didn't particularly like that. But as I said, I have just finished book 9. That's not something, those sort of things don't happen frequently enough for me to be like, this is terrible. I don't like this at all. But I want to say that in 9 books, there's been something like that 2 or 3 times. So just be aware. They're older. So after that, I loved this book, The Secret of Nightingale Wood by Lucy Strange. So as I mentioned, we had this dreary weather, and everything was gray and muddy and wet and windy. I cannot remember the last time I saw green grass. And I wanted to read something sunshiny and fairy tale in its nicest sense. And just this wonderful little adventure story. I needed sunlight in my life. So I decided to read this because I apparently did not remember what I had been told about this book because I expected it to be sunshiny. It was not sunshiny, okay? This is a middle grade book, and it is like grief and sorrow plays such a large part in this book, coming to terms with unhappy events and not being in control of your own life and things happening to you. Not happy. You have Henrietta. She is 11 years old, and her family calls her Henry. And she has a mother and a father and a little baby sister. I want to say she must probably be about... Sorry, my phone just gave me a little message and said the battery was getting low because I forgot to plug it in. Okay, so you have Henry, her mother and father, and her little baby sister, who I think is probably about 18 months old, and they call her Piglet. And there's a nanny and the cook, and those are the majority of the household. And you find out from the very beginning that they have recently moved from London to this country manor following the death of Henry's older brother. So like I said, grief plays a very, very large part in these books. And Henry just sort of finds herself in this whole new life. And the people in her life are not the same anymore. Her mother is struggling with depression. The father is like helpless to make the situation any better. The nanny is just trying to do the right thing for everybody. And the fairy tale element sort of comes in because Henry loves fairy tales. So she starts to process her life and her grief through imagery that mirrors fairy tales. And there are figurative monsters masquerading as men in these books. Now remember I said figurative. And Henry has to learn to become the hero of her own story. So it was beautifully written. The imagery was fantastic. I enjoyed the fairy tale like elements to the book, but it also had a very dark gothic feel to it, which was very surprising to me for a middle grade book, but I loved that. So if you are looking for a book that deals with depression and grief and lack of control in your life for somebody who is in the middle grades, this is a great book because it does cover those things and it covers them in a very accessible way to children. But even as an adult, I found this to be very, very enjoyable, and I'm going to go find more books by Lucy Strange because it was that good. And that is The Secret of Nightingale Wood by Lucy Strange. And then to finish off, I read another sad book dealing with grief and sorrow and a child who is not really in control of their own life. And that is Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. So this is a YA book, And it's told in, or it's written in free verse. So it's like little poems, basically, but no rhyming. And the entire story takes place, well, I say the entire story, after like chapter 5. The entire book takes place on an elevator from the 7th floor to the lobby. And Will is in the elevator, and his brother has recently died from like a shooting, just like right outside their apartment. So gun violence is the main theme of this book, and the effects of gun violence, and the sorrow of gun violence. And Will is like writing these, he's not standing in the elevator writing, but this story is told as if Will is writing these poems in like a notebook, and we're reading them. And they're reflections on his life, the effects of gun violence on his life and his brother's life and his family's life. And I thought this was fantastic. There was, I really wish, I took a picture of it on my phone, and I was intending to write it down so I could tell you guys about it in the video. I'm wondering if I can, and I really should have just marked it in the book. But there's this one section where Will is talking about his older brother, Sean. And he says that their mother, when Sean turned 18, their mother took her hands off of him and pressed them together to pray that Sean would come home, that he wouldn't get his girlfriend pregnant, and that he wouldn't die. And that really resonated with me as a mother of an 18-year-old child. That's exactly what it feels like, because they are now set out into the world to make of it what they can, and you pray that the world will be kind to them, that they will set foot and walk the right path. So I really loved this. I thought it was fantastic, and I highly recommend it. And that is Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. And I have not read a lot of books that are written in verse, but it was no difficulty at all. So don't let that stop you from picking it up, because it's really good. So that is the 12 books that I read in February, the one that I DNF'd. And now to just wrap it up, I'm going to talk about what I'm reading right now. I am reading The Bitch in the House, which is a collection of 26 essays. 26 women tell the truth about sex, solitude, work, motherhood, and marriage. I'm really enjoying this. I want to say I'm on like essay number 6. And I wasn't sure I was going to like this at first, but I read the first essay and I was like, yes, exactly. So the first essay kind of covers the mental burden of being a wife and a mother. And that is something that I was able to relate to so strongly. Like I tell my husband all the time, it's exhausting being the frontal lobe for the entire family, because that's what it feels like. I have to remember our animals' vet's appointments, our kids' doctor's appointments, make sure everybody has snacks. What does my child need for a class project? Oh, I got to go chaperone that field trip. When are it just, you know what I'm talking about. But for mine, it's for 5 people and 2 pets. I have to remember all of these things and things for myself, and it's mentally exhausting. And so that was something that was addressed in the first essay, and I was like, I'm going to love this. And so far, I really, really have enjoyed it. But there's more than just those things in there. Like, you don't have to be a wife or a mother. There are just essays about women trying to make relationships work, whether or not they want to be parents. Having to relearn from what they were taught as children. So lots of different things in here. Just being a woman you'll find something in here that will resonate with you. At least I think that. And my newest fiction read is Piranesi by Susanna Clark. So far, I'm absolutely loving this. The descriptions in this are fantastic. I'm, of course, going to go into more detail about this in my next wrap-up, but in a nutshell, you're following a character who's living in this great, big, massive house that never seems to end, and there's like oceans and freshwater and halls of statues. It's just very magical feeling, but not magic in the sense of fairy tale happy magic. There's a very dark, shadowy feel to the books, but they're still beautiful. The book is still beautiful, and I'm very, very happy that I picked this up because it is well worth the read. And like always, I am reading a book with my soon-to-be 11-year-old son, and we finished Percy Jackson last year, and then we started the Heroes of Olympus, and we're now on book 3 of Heroes of Olympus. I like these better than the Percy Jackson series. They have more of an adult feel to them, sort of like the 5th and 6th books of the Harry Potter series, how they felt more adult than like the Chamber of Secrets did. So I'm really enjoying these, and I have a whole other stack of books that I'm hoping to work my way through. 2 of which off the top of my head are thrillers. One is a literary fiction. Some other things. So anyway, great reading month in February. Hopefully that trend will keep continuing. I'm really excited for hoping spring will get here soon. And yeah, so thank you very much for clicking on my video, and I hope to see you again. Bye.